Some people never stop moving. They fill their days with noise, motion, and endless tasks, as if standing still might expose something too heavy to face. They call it productivity, discipline, ambition. But sometimes it's just grief in disguise, grief that has nowhere else to go. There's a quiet ache behind the constant motion, a secret mourning that hides beneath full calendars and unread messages. Because if they slow down, the silence might speak. The memories might return. The losses, both small and invisible, might finally ask to be felt. And so, they keep moving. Not because they love the work, but because stopping feels like breaking. This is the unseen story of those who stay busy to avoid the weight of what still hurts. A portrait of grief wearing the mask of momentum. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from work itself, but from the inability to stop working. The kind that hums beneath the surface, even when the world is quiet. It's the feeling of being haunted by stillness, as if silence itself were a mirror that shows too much. They wake up early, scroll through emails, move from one task to another, not because they must, but because they cannot not. The absence of movement feels unbearable. Each pause opens a small doorway to something vast and unwelcome. When the mind is left alone, memories begin to whisper. The ones that were never given names, the small griefs, unspoken, ungrieved, start to stir. And so, they keep themselves busy, layering hours upon hours until there is no room left for feeling. To the outside world, they seem disciplined, productive, driven. But beneath that rhythm lies an anxiety disguised as purpose, a secret fear of being left alone with the self. There is a strange irony in this, that some people chase stillness all their lives, while others run from it as though it were a predator. The truth is, stillness can feel dangerous to those who have never known safety within their own thoughts. When everything stops, the heart begins to speak, and it rarely speaks softly. The brain, like an overworked engine, keeps demanding more motion. It invents reasons to stay awake, unfinished lists, self-imposed duties, another small task that feels urgent but isn't, anything to maintain the hum, anything to keep the silence at bay. Because silence has its own gravity. It pulls buried memories upward. It has a way of turning background feelings into full voices. When there's no distraction left, the body begins to remember. Sometimes, what they are truly afraid of is not laziness, but loss. The moment they stop moving, their losses begin to take shape. The job that changed them, the person they never got to say goodbye to, the self they outgrew but never properly mourned. So they move and move, not out of strength, but out of protection. Movement becomes a kind of armor. It hides the fragile parts that have not yet healed. Yet there is an invisible cost. A life lived in constant motion slowly loses its texture. The days blur, the nights feel short but heavy. Time passes, but it doesn't feel lived. It feels used. And when someone finally asks, "When do you rest?" they smile and answer lightly. But deep down, they don't know what rest even means anymore. Because rest is not the absence of movement, it is the presence of safety. And if the mind doesn't feel safe, rest feels impossible. There's a strange kind of loneliness that grows in such lives, the kind that no amount of company or success can fill. It's the loneliness of never meeting yourself, of never hearing your own voice clearly enough to know what it's asking for. In quiet moments, when the noise fades just slightly, something inside them aches. It's not a loud ache, it's gentle, but persistent, like the sound of a small clock ticking in a large empty room. That is the sound of unexpressed grief. Grief for what was lost. Grief for what could have been. Grief for the version of them that was never allowed to simply rest without earning it. And so they keep themselves occupied. They tell themselves they are fine. They call it progress. But somewhere deep within, there's a soft truth waiting, that their endless motion is not a sign of life expanding, but of pain contained. And maybe one day, when they can finally stop without fear, they will discover that stillness was never the enemy. It was simply the place where all the unspoken things waited to be seen. Grief is not always loud. Sometimes it slips quietly into the spaces between ordinary days, wearing the face of fatigue, distraction, or the need to stay busy. When people think of grief, they imagine funerals, tears, absence, but often the most powerful griefs are the ones that go unrecognized, the silent ones that happen while life keeps moving. The loss of a dream, the fading of a friendship that once felt eternal, the quiet disappearance of a version of oneself that will never return. There are many forms of dying that have nothing to do with death. Somewhere along the way, a person loses something, or someone, and never finds the right place to put that pain. So they carry it, hidden beneath routine, disguised as determination. They learn to function around the loss, as if the wound were just another organ that had to be accommodated. Days pass, then years, and though the pain dulls, the shape of the absence remains. It becomes a hum, a background noise that never entirely fades. That hum is what drives them to move, to fill, to do. They don't always know what they've lost. Sometimes it isn't even clear. It's just a sense that something once felt whole and now doesn't. It could be the innocence of a younger self, the simplicity of a time when they didn't have to perform strength, the presence of someone who once made the world softer. Loss, when unprocessed, doesn't stay still. It reshapes itself into behavior, and one of the most common transformations is busyness. Because grief needs movement. When it can't move through tears or words, it moves through action. The person begins to fill their days, not because they are driven, but because emptiness terrifies them. Every blank space feels like a reminder. Every pause becomes a mirror. So they keep walking forward, stacking tasks like bricks, trying to build a wall high enough to keep memory out. But memory doesn't obey walls. It seeps through in moments, in a song that plays unexpectedly, in the scent of something familiar, in the way light hits an old photograph. That's when the ache returns, sudden, sharp, uninvited. They feel it for a second, then quickly distract themselves again. Grief becomes a ghost that knocks gently, but is never let inside. Psychologists often describe this as ambiguous loss. It's the grief of something that's not entirely gone, but no longer reachable. The mother who sips alive but emotionally distant. The dream that once guided them but no longer fits. The younger self who believed in forever. Ambiguous grief doesn't ask for closure. It just asks to be felt. But in a world that values motion, feeling is often mistaken for weakness. So they keep moving. They tell themselves it's better this way. Yet somewhere, deep in the rhythm of all that movement, the loss whispers. It says, I am still here. You can bury me in your schedule. Sometimes they dream of slowing down, of sitting quietly long enough to meet the ghost they've been avoiding. But the thought feels heavy, like stepping into deep water without knowing if they can swim. And so, they return to motion. They organize, achieve, respond, scroll. Each action a small act of avoidance, each success another layer of emotional insulation. But beneath all that doing lies a single truth, that the desire to stay busy is often a love letter to what once was. An unconscious way of saying, I miss you, but I don't just know how to stop missing you. Grief doesn't always need tears. Sometimes it just needs permission to exist without purpose, to be what it is, a proof that something once mattered deeply enough to be lost. Human beings are wired to survive pain, not to sit with it. When something hurts, the brain's first instinct is not reflection, it's protection. And so, it builds walls made of habits, distractions, and justifications. Busyness becomes one of the most elegant walls of all. Because it looks healthy, it looks responsible. It gives the illusion of progress while quietly numbing the nervous system. In psychology, this is known as avoidant coping. It's the mind's way of saying, If I can control how I feel, maybe I can control what I do. And so, the person begins to fill every empty moment, not because they love the work, but because it offers relief from uncertainty. Every time they check their phone, open their laptop, or make a new list, they feel a brief flicker of calm. That's dopamine, the brain's way of rewarding action. It's the same chemical released when we accomplish something meaningful. Except here, it's not the meaning that drives it. It's fear. When grief or sadness rises, the body releases cortisol, the stress hormone. Cortisol tells the body that something sips wrong. But the moment the person distracts themselves through movement, scrolling, cleaning, or achieving, dopamine steps in and quiets the discomfort. And so begins the loop. Pain, distraction, temporary relief, deeper avoidance. This cycle can last years. It becomes the emotional equivalent of keeping a door locked while pretending there's nothing behind it. The problem is, the longer that door stays closed, the more pressure builds behind it. Stillness then becomes threatening, not because of what it is, but because of what it contains. The modern world reinforces this loop. We are rewarded for speed, efficiency, and visible productivity. There's no medal for silence, no applause for doing nothing. And so, avoidance becomes socially acceptable, even celebrated. Someone grieving but staying productive is called strong. Someone resting to heal is called lazy. And so, people learn early that it's safer to keep moving than to risk being misunderstood. But the nervous system pays the price. Constant motion keeps the body in a state of low-grade fight or flight, an invisible hum of survival that never fully shuts off. Even sleep becomes light, restless. Dreams become crowded. This is why some people wake up already tired. Because their minds never actually rested, they just paused between tasks. Avoidance is not a failure of strength, it's an adaptation. The brain uses it to protect the person from emotions that once felt unbearable. But what once protected them eventually imprisons them. Imagine a small child who was once overwhelmed by grief, who learned that keeping busy helped the sadness stay quiet. That child grows up, but the pattern stays. The busyness becomes identity. They no longer remember who they were before they started running. In therapy, this is often called functional avoidance. People can appear calm, capable, even thriving, yet emotionally disconnected from their own inner world. It's not that they don't feel, it's that they've learned not to listen. Over time, this disconnection can manifest as burnout, chronic fatigue, or emotional numbness. Not because of overwork alone, but because of emotional overload that has nowhere to go. Avoidance promises safety, but safety without honesty becomes emptiness. And emptiness, disguised as achievement, eventually collapses in on itself. To break the cycle is not about slowing down, it's about daring to stay, to feel the discomfort long enough to learn that it won't destroy you, to realize that pain, when given air, becomes softer. Avoidance may keep you alive, but presence, quiet, trembling presence, is what helps you live. There comes a moment, often late at night, when the noise of the world has settled, when silence feels unbearable. The air feels too still, the room too quiet, the thoughts too loud. This is where the real battle begins. Not the struggle of the day, but the confrontation of the self. For someone who has spent years running, stillness feels foreign, almost dangerous. It's like walking into a room filled with echoes, every sound returning, amplified, asking to be heard. When they finally try to rest, their mind does not. The quiet becomes crowded with unfinished emotions, things unsaid, moments unresolved, griefs unnamed. Each one rises, slow and deliberate, like ghosts coming to sit beside them. And the instinct is to move again, to reach for the phone, the light, the next distraction. Because stillness for them is not peace. It's confrontation. They tell themselves, I just can sit, relax. But the truth is deeper. They can't relax because relaxation invites remembering, and remembering reopens the wounds that busyness had so carefully stitched shut. The nervous system doesn't know how to distinguish between a physical threat and an emotional one. So when silence brings up old pain, the body reacts as if it's under attack. Heart racing, muscles tense, restlessness pulsing through the limbs. This is not weakness, it sets biology. The body remembers what the mind tries to forget. It stores emotions in its tissue, its breath, its posture, and when stillness arrives, the body finally has space to speak. That's why some people cry without knowing why. Why sitting quietly can feel like drowning. Why doing nothing sometimes feels like falling apart. It sits the body sits language of release. The grief beneath the busyness, finally finding its voice. In silence, there are no roles to play, no distractions to hide behind. It sets just you and what you've been avoiding. For some, this encounter feels unbearable. For others, it becomes the first step toward truth. The mind resists at first. It argues. It invents new tasks. It floods you with urgency that doesn't exist. Anything to escape the confrontation. Because silence, when truly met, dismantles illusions. Stillness shows what has been running your life. Not goals, not dreams, but avoidance itself. It shows that beneath every rush of productivity, there was fear. Fear of emptiness. Fear of insignificance. Fear of feeling too much. But within that fear also lives honesty. The kind that heals. Because the same silence that terrifies you can also cradle you. It holds the parts of you that were never allowed to speak. It says nothing, yet it listens completely. There's an invisible threshold between running from silence and resting within it. Crossing that threshold feels like breaking, but it's really unfolding. For the first time, you begin to feel what's always been there. The ache that was hidden behind the noise. The sorrow that shaped your need for control. The longing that lived quietly beneath your accomplishments. This is where grief begins to transform, not through effort, but through allowance. The mind begins to learn that silence is not punishment. It is the sound of healing beginning. Stillness is not the enemy. It is the place where the body lays down its armor, where the mind, exhausted from pretending, finally exhales. And though it hurts, though it feels raw and unmanageable, it is here that the truth begins to breathe again. Because silence, when fully entered, does not destroy. It reveals. It doesn't happen all at once. The moment of realization. It begins quietly, like fabric slowly loosening under the weight of time. A thread pulled here, a soft tear there. Until one day, the armor begins to slip. For so long, they've held themselves together through sheer motion, always doing, always performing, always strong. But even the strongest rhythm breaks when the heart starts to whisper louder than the noise. The first sign is exhaustion. Not the kind that sleep can fix, but the kind that seeps into the soul. They wake up tired. Tasks that once brought relief now feel hollow. The busyness that once protected them now feels like a cage. Something inside begins to ask, why am I still running? It's a dangerous question, because it can't be answered by productivity. It can only be answered by truth. At first they try to ignore it. They double down on habits, fill the day with plans, push through the fatigue. But cracks begin to appear, small, undeniable signs of emotional fatigue. Moments where the noise feels unbearable. Moments when they forget what all this work is even for. Then one day, in the middle of an ordinary task, washing dishes, waiting in line, driving home, something shifts. A sudden wave rises from nowhere. A lump in the throat, a memory, a softness that feels like breaking. That's when it happens. The gentle unraveling. Not dramatic, not cinematic. Just a quiet surrender to what has always been waiting underneath. Tears come, not as weakness, but as truth. They fall without reason, without story. Because grief doesn't always need language, it just needs release. The unraveling is not a collapse. It sips an honesty too long postponed. A body finally allowed to stop pretending it's fine. A soul finally remembering that it is human. For years, they believed strength meant control. But now, they start to see that real strength might mean letting go of the armor, the pretense, the endless need to move. This stage feels uncertain. The old habits no longer bring comfort, but the new peace has not yet arrived. It's like standing between two worlds, the one built on avoidance and the one built on acceptance. Psychologists call this disintegration, the period when the old coping structures begin to dissolve, making space for something more authentic. It feels like loss because it is loss, the loss of an identity centered on control. But beneath that loss lies renewal. There's something profoundly human about falling apart just enough to rebuild differently. To realize that being busy was never about time, it was about safety. And now, safety must come from somewhere deeper. So, they begin to allow small pauses. Moments of stillness that once felt unbearable, now feel fragile, but possible. The silence doesn't roar as it used to. It sighs. It holds. The unraveling continues gently, day by day. Each tear, each pause, each slow breath becomes a small act of homecoming. For the first time, they begin to listen to the ache without running from it. They learn that the grief beneath their busyness was not something to conquer, but something to understand. And in that understanding, something unexpected happens. The motion slows. The body softens. The mind, once trapped in loops of doing, begins to rest in simply being. They realize they were never broken, just carrying too much without a place to set it down. And now, in the quiet space left behind by exhaustion, they finally begin to lay it down. That is the gentle unraveling. Not the end of strength, but the beginning of peace. When the unraveling slows, silence no longer feels like a punishment. It becomes a room, still, dim, and strangely alive. A place where the ghosts finally gather. They're not the kind of ghosts that haunt. They're the kind that wait. Fragments of old memories, forgotten selves, unfinished goodbyes. They linger quietly, hoping to be seen. For years, those ghosts were chased away by noise, by motion, achievement, distraction. But now, as the noise fades, they return. Not to harm, but to be acknowledged. Sitting with them is not easy. The first instinct is still to move, to busy the hands, to reach for something familiar. But with time, the body learns the language of stillness. It learns that nothing terrible happens when one stops running. In that quiet, the truth reveals itself gently. These ghosts are not enemies. They are teachers. They show what was once loved deeply. They show who was once lost, and how much they mattered. They show the moments that shaped a person, even when those moments hurt. Each ghost carries a memory that wants to be felt, not fixed. A scent, a voice, a place, a regret. At first, the memories sting, but slowly they soften. Because grief, when given attention, transforms. It stops trying to scream through exhaustion, and instead begins to whisper through understanding. This is the stage where presence becomes healing. Not through effort, but through allowing. Through breathing through discomfort instead of escaping it. Therapists sometimes describe this as emotional witnessing. It means sitting with your own feelings as you would sit with a hurting friend. Gently, without judgment, without needing to change anything. The same grief that once demanded avoidance now asks only for presence. To be seen, to be felt, to be known. In those quiet moments, the person begins to realize something profound. They were never grieving just what they lost. They were grieving the years they spent running from themselves. The ghosts begin to shift. They lose their sharpness, their power to startle. They become part of the landscape, familiar, almost tender. Sometimes, one ghost steps forward more clearly, a memory of someone once loved. And instead of sadness, there sets gratitude. Because love, even when gone, leaves warmth behind. Other times, a ghost appears carrying shame or regret, and instead of hiding, the person breathes, allowing even the painful memories to exist without rewriting them. That breath becomes a small act of forgiveness. It's strange, this new relationship with stillness. What once felt like suffocation, now feels like space. What once felt like loss now feels like connection. Because in learning to sit with grief, one also learns to sit with life. The same silence that holds sorrow also holds beauty. The way light falls across a wall, the sound of one's own breathing, the texture of an ordinary moment that had always been overlooked. This is healing, not the erasure of pain, but the integration of it. The ghosts are not banished, they are welcomed. They find their place within the heart, instead of hovering outside it. And slowly the person understands. To feel deeply is not a curse. It's evidence of having lived. There will still be days when the noise calls, when busyness feels tempting again. But now they know how to return, how to pause, breathe, and listen to the quiet companions within. They have learned to sit with their ghosts, and in doing so, have learned to sit with themselves. There comes a day when the noise no longer feels necessary. Not because life is quieter, but because the heart is. The constant hum of doing, the restless search for motion, it loses its pull. Busyness, once a shield, begins to feel heavy, unnecessary. The silence that once frightened, now feels like a kind of homecoming. This is what healing sounds like. Not triumph, not transformation, but stillness. A calm that arrives so gently, you almost don't notice it at first. You wake up, and for once, there is no urgency. No need to fill the morning with tasks or checklists. Just a soft awareness of being here, in this body, in this breath. The ghosts still visit, but they come differently now. Not to be avoided, not to haunt. They arrive like old friends you once feared to see, sitting quietly beside you in the evening light. You realize they never wanted to leave you, they just wanted to be known. And once they were, they stopped needing to knock so loudly. Grief has not disappeared. It still hums faintly, like a low note beneath the song of daily life. But it's no longer the melody, it's the harmony. A soft reminder that love once lived here, that loss was the price of caring deeply. There sits peace in that knowing. Not the peace of forgetting, but of remembering without drowning. When the noise fades, something remarkable happens. Time returns. Not the frantic kind that slips through overworked hands, but slow time, the kind that lingers. You begin to notice things again, the way sunlight settles on the floor, the sound of distant laughter, the taste of a quiet meal. Moments expand. Life breathes again. You start to see that stillness was never emptiness. It was space. Space for emotion. Space for truth. Space for being alive without performing it. There's a new kind of strength in this gentleness. Not the strength to endure, but the strength to feel. To move through the world without armor. To let grief walk beside you instead of behind you. And slowly the desire to stay busy transforms. What once came from fear now comes from curiosity. You still create, still work, still move, but differently. Not to escape life, but to express it. Your days no longer feel like a defense. They feel like a dialogue. Between effort and ease. Between doing and being. Between remembering and releasing. Sometimes, late at night, you still hear the echo of your old pace. That quiet voice whispering, you should be doing more. But you smile now. Because you recognize it for what it is, a remnant of the old survival song. And you know how to answer it, by not answering at all, by letting the silence speak for you. The world outside may still glorify motion, but you have learned the subtle art of pause. You've learned that presence doesn't mean stopping everything. It means being awake in whatever you do. So you live differently now. You work, but also rest. You remember, but also release. You move, but you no longer run. The grief remains, soft, familiar, almost kind. It lives within you now, not as pain, but as depth. It reminds you that even in loss, there is connection. Even in stillness, there is life. And when the noise fades completely, you understand something the world rarely teaches. That peace is not the absence of pain. It sits the presence of acceptance. The heart no longer races to escape itself. It simply beats. Quietly, steadily, alive.